dignity, compassion and cultural sensitivity. But that's enough about me. You're listening to Care Across Cultures on Link FM 96.7, all available on DAB and online, Facebook. If you'd like to join the discussion today, our studio hotline is 0114 261 8181 and our WhatsApp is 07939 849 339. Now all the and I'm just going to take a short break. Welcome back. Apologies for that short hiatus, as this is just my incredible technical skills, so my apologies. So I don't know how many people sort of heard that or not, so I'm just going to repeat it very briefly. Today's programme on Care Across Cultures is about faith, feelings and final moments, with three remarkable guests: a hospital chaplain, a physiotherapist and a Macmillan programme lead for palliative and end-of-life care. We'll be talking about what really matters when facing mortality, how different cultures and faiths approach death, practical ways that families can navigate this profound journey, addressing some of the fears around dying, finding moments of connection and hope, and my guests will help us to understand how to support loved ones with dignity, compassion and cultural sensitivity. You're listening to Link FM on 96.7. Our studio hotline is 0114 261 8181. WhatsApp is 07939 849 339. Love to hear you, your views, opinions. Please phone us or send us a text message. Let me introduce you to my wonderful guests. So, I'm going to start with John. Hi John, how are you today, sir?
Morning, I'm good, thank you, Mervyn.
Just tell me a little bit about who you are, what your job role is, where you work.
So, I'm John, I'm a physiotherapist. I work at the Prince of Wales Hospice in Pontefract. We're a smallish hospice, we're a 14-bedded unit, and we have been getting our community groups out, so I'm part of the wellbeing team, so we run community groups, obviously out in the community, just to try and just to reach out to people that can't access us or that don't need to access our services as an inpatient just yet.
Fantastic. You're in the right programme at the right time with the right topic. Thank you so much for that, John.
Thank you.
My next guest is Amy. Amy, tell me a little bit more about yourself, please, who you are, what you do.
Yeah, good morning, and thanks for inviting me to be here today. So, I'm Amy. I have a very long title. I know you mentioned it earlier, Mervyn, but it's Macmillan Transformation Lead for Palliative and End-of-Life Care across West Yorkshire. Essentially what that means is I work within the West Yorkshire Integrated Care Board, and all my work is around palliative and end-of-life care, the gaps in services where we should be doing better, and especially a real focus around health inequality groups as well. But I'm a nurse by background, so I've worked in cancer care primarily, and palliative care for many years. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Fantastic. We will pick up on some of those terminology that you use later on. So my next guest, second time round, Maysoon. Tell me a little bit more about yourself. Somebody who may not have sort of heard our programme last time you came on.
Yeah, so assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, and a good morning to all our listeners. I am Ustadah Maysoon Shafiq. I am a qualified alima, and I work as the chaplaincy team lead for Rotherham Foundation Trust, and I'm actually the first female Muslim chaplaincy team lead in the whole of NHS England, so proud to hold that title. And
everybody clapping there.
Amazing.
And hopefully leaving the legacy for many people from being backgrounds to raise the head above the parapet. Aside from that, I am the head of Islamic advice for the National NHS Muslim Network, so all the trusts in England, if they've got an issue on Islamic advice that they want kind of answering for the staff, for the patients, I'm the go-to person. As well as that, I am doing a PhD in palliative care.
Wow, thank you so much. So before I go into asking questions, I just want to remind everyone that the views and opinions expressed in this programme belong to me and to my guests, and are not necessarily those of Link FM, Rotherham Hospice, or the organisations that my guests represent. Thank you. So let's go straight into some questions. Okay. The first question, I'm going to start with Amy. What brought you into working in end-of-life care?
Yeah, so I guess very early on in my nursing career, I found a real kind of love for supporting people with cancer, and that's where I started, supporting people working on the wards, and I had lots of experiences excuse me, around supporting people at end of life, but as a very junior member of staff actually, with very limited training, I would say, at that point. So it was kind of learning on the ground, you know, of how best to support people from different religions, different cultures, different spirituality. And I had a very, very amazing experience with supporting a family who actually, it was a lady who was dying. She was 84, she had advanced cancer, and she was very much at peace with that, but her one wish was to have her son with her who lived in Australia, and that was very, very difficult for them, and that didn't work out actually, and he didn't make it back in time to support her, but I kind of stepped into being her support for that period of time. I really got to know her while she was on the ward, and we had lovely moments together where we spoke about her life, her son's life, how proud she was, what her wishes were at the end of life, funerals, and I was kind of that facilitator, I would say, between her and her son. We had lots of conversations with her son, and he did make it, but just not in time for her death, and then I kind of continued to provide that support after for him, and that was a moment in time then where I found I absolutely love doing this. I think it's an absolute honour to support people at the end of their life and be part of that moment with them, is an honour. So that's where my love for palliative end of life care came from, really, and then that grew throughout my career.
Thank you so much for that. And John, does that resonate with you in terms of working with people at end of life? You know, I'm specifically talking about a moment, that moment that Amy just mentioned. Have you got something similar, or?
It was similar in one respect. I've been at the hospice now for 3 years, so for 6 years prior to that I was a community physio. I worked with adults with learning disabilities. One, I say young chappie, he looked a lot younger than he was, bless him. He accessed the hospice when he was coming up towards end of life, and I did 1 or 2 visits into the hospice to support staff in there. He was quite a complex patient from moving and handling and 1 or 2 other bits of pieces, and I was actually scared of going into the hospice. Everybody that I know that had ever been in a hospice, family members, friends, it was that old kind of myth that once you enter a hospice you never leave, sadly. But when I went in, it was it was amazing to see. So it was coming up to Christmas times. They had one of the local schools in singing hymns. Where I'm from, I'm a big rugby league fan. They had one of the local rugby league teams in, so I was a little bit starstruck. And it was like the love and the caring in the place that made me think, do you know what, I could actually work in a place like this. So it was from my 1 or 2 visits there that spurred me to apply for the job when it came up, and it's kind of never looked back since. And since starting, it's every member of staff in that place, from the housekeeping to the main consultants, they all go above and beyond to support people in the last few days, or if they're not in the last few days, how can we make this person's life better, how can we get that person home, or what do they want to achieve with their time that's left.
Well, that's amazing. That sort of resonates with me as well, because I have a very similar story in terms of hospices, how I came to work in hospice, and that was because I visited Wakefield Hospice some time ago, and I was amazed, just like you were. So, Maysoon, as an alim, as an imam, we know that a huge part of your role is around death and dying. Expand a little bit for me. What was the pinnacle moment that made you choose this specific career or role? Or
I think my journey actually started 20 years ago. My father passed away. Me and Amy was having this conversation off the radio before we joined. He actually passed away in St James's Hospital in Leeds, where Amy started off. He may have been the carer for my father, we don't know. So I was only 19 when he passed away, and as a young 19-year-old, a teenager, as I was the next of kin, I was responsible for dealing with all the matters that dealt with after he passed, so the death certificate, everything else I needed to do. But I didn't know what palliative care was. I didn't know what end of life care was. I feel I had a very sheltered and protected upbringing by my parents, so the first ever exposure I had to someone dying was my own father. So fast forward 20 years later, this is my role, this is what I'm doing. And in Islam, as an alima, the belief is, the Prophet, peace be upon him, has taught us, if a father or a mother pass away and they leave behind a pious child who is forever trying to do good deeds, they will forever reap the reward. So although I started off by saying my father is no longer here, I truly, truly believe he is the recipient of all the good work I do, and I hope through his journey and the journey that we shared together, I am able to leave a legacy behind and educate and raise awareness for many other Muslims out there, and just so that we don't have another Maysoon who's a 19-year-old who doesn't understand what palliative care is, just to reduce the stigma, to break down these barriers, to have open and honest conversations. And it's only once we have that, in my father's words, will we actually break down communication barriers.
and that was a really touching story and quite emotional. And just based on that, I want to ask you a further question. In your sort of life experience, work experience, what do you find that people most fear about dying, and what actually concerns them at that time? Can you share something around that?
I think it's a variation, Brother Mirban. I think some people have a high level of faith, so they have a high level of iman, so they do not fear dying, because the ultimate belief is that there's a life after death, and they're obviously going to meet their creator, so they don't have that fear. But those people that do have that fear, the concerns are whether they've done enough, whether they're, and sometimes if it's young mothers, so I've actually been on the wards when we've got 40-year-old young moms, 35-year-old young moms who have young children, youngest being 5 years old. Their fears are what's going to happen to the loved ones that they're going to leave behind. But it's, as a role, as a chaplain, the role is always to trying to ease them into the journey ahead, but also not to have the worry and the concern about the people and the loved ones you're going to leave behind. So it's always a difficult conversation, and it always will be. But it's really having open, honest conversations that can really take this to the next step, I feel.
Thank you so much for that. Amy, the same question to you actually, in terms of, because you said that you've been a nurse for 16 plus years and you're still working in this, so you must have come across quite a few patient stories.
Yeah.
And how does that sort of resonate with you in terms of dying versus what actually matters to that person? Because Maysoon spoke about Islam and religion,
Yeah.
but what about people who have no religion or who are atheists?
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people actually it is about that, and you touched upon it as well around we don't really talk about death and dying, or we don't talk about death and dying in the UK. So it's kind of about 88% of people grow up where it's not mentioned. They're very much protected from, you know, difficult conversations. So it's that real understanding of what's going to happen to me, you know, at the end of life. A real fear for some people around kind of I'm going to be in lots of pain and what's going to happen, and it's going to be really distressing. And I think that's where it comes in around having them open conversations of, well, what does happen at the end of life, and what is, you know, what can we do to support you with that? And for that person as well, it's really individual. So even if you're from a similar religion or faith or spirituality, actually what their wishes are and their values is very, very different from someone else. And for a lot of groups actually, especially kind of homeless communities, Gypsy Roma communities, they have a real fear around that they're not going to be heard, not going to be listened to, and not have their values understood actually. And there is in certain groups a lot of mistrust of the healthcare service, and that's over many years. So it is around really kind of building that trust, listening. So I think we are naturally as healthcare professional fixers. And when I went into kind of supporting people with advanced cancer and palliative end of life care, it's completely switching that actually and thinking we're not here, we can't fix this.
Yes.
You know, this person has a terminal diagnosis, but what we can do is really listen, and not just say how are you and receive that, really listen. So it's holding that space, holding that time and that compassion to sit down with that person, be really present, give them time, which I know is really challenging on busy wards, and listen to what do they want, what are their fears, and that open communication which you talked about is the only way. And I think, and it's that we need to be more open about talking about death and dying in general in different cultures and across the UK, and speaking to children about that, and, you know, trying to normalise that, I think is, you know, a lot of work needs to be done around that. But then just having that, them really open and honest conversations and opening that door. Some people think someone else will do it. You know, some people might think, you know, the nurse might think the doctor's going to do it, you know, or the physio might do it, you know, or whoever. And then what then tends to happen is then nobody does it. And then that's when people, and the research also says as well that a lot of most people in that situation actually want to talk about it, but nobody's asked them.
Nobody's asked them.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. John, just want to pick up on slightly different in terms of open conversations. As a physiotherapist, my understanding of physio is that, you know, it is sort of quite hands-on at some points, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, have you ever had the opportunity to have these sort of open conversations about death and dying with any of your sort of patients that you've come across?
Yeah, quite a few times. Personally, and being honest, that was something I was really afraid of starting at the hospice. When somebody is approaching end of life, our doctors, our consultants will put somebody on an end of life care programme. So once I know that patient is on it, there's very little role a physio can do in that respect. But it's usually the patients that catch you off guard that kind of a conversation will kind of materialise out of, like, naturally, that's not prompted, and those it's quite strange, they do catch you off guard. But I think, like Amy was saying, some people do want to talk about it, and if they broach that subject, it's quite easy to speak about, because 9 times out of 10 people just want a listening ear, and they do struggle to talk with their loved ones, especially if it's a younger family. It's something daunting to talk about, and as I said, we're all scared about talking about dying, so it does come about, but I've got to hold my hands up. It's not something that I get asked about often,
No.
But it's quite humbling to be in those conversations, and again quite touching. Somebody's opened up to you, so they find something that they can relate to within you to open up. So yeah, quite humbling and emotional, but again it's just about listening to that person.
Yeah, thank you for that. We're going to come up to a break very soon, so for those of us who are listening, and those who may not sort of appreciate the English that we've been speaking in, आज हम बात कर रहे हैं मौत के बारे में, आखिरी वक्त क्या है, कैसे है. जो तो मुसलमान लोग हैं, अभी मैसून सिस्टर बोल रही थी कि मुसलमानों के लिए तो बड़ा एक आसान है कि हमें तो मालूम है कि हम ये ज़िंदगी जो है ना ख़त्म हो जाएगी, लेकिन असल ज़िंदगी जो है ना मौत के बाद शुरू होगी. लेकिन ऐसे भी लोग हैं जिनका कोई मज़हब नहीं है या उनका मज़हब कुछ और सिखाता है. तो अभी हम यही बात कर रहे थे इन लोगों के साथ कि क्या क्या है, कौन से इशू होते हैं. So if you have any questions, please call us. I'm just going to go into a commercial break now, so we'll be back soon after. Welcome back to Care Across Cultures. I'm your host, Mirvan Hussain. I've got some wonderful guests today. You're listening to Link FM on 96.7 FM. Our studio hotline, if you'd like to call us and join the conversation, is 0114 261 8181. Or you can always send us a text message on WhatsApp 07939 849 339. If you've just joined us, I've been talking to some wonderful colleagues, guests, Maysoon Shafiq, John Mitchell, Amy Kenyon. We've been having some wonderful conversations, and just to remind everybody and let everybody know that today is a special programme which is going to carry on till 12:30. So you've got plenty of time to pluck up the courage to phone in and ask some questions. I'd love it if you would. So I'm going to go back to my guests and start. A question that I want to really ask is about physical and spiritual comfort. And I'm going to go to John. As a physiotherapist, John, how does physiotherapy contribute to comfort and dignity when someone's dying?
I've been racking my brains because I knew this question would come in of my input, but I think what I need to stress is everybody's an individual, so it varies greatly. Some people's wish is that they just don't want to have a catheter fitted, or they don't want to, they still want to be able to get out of bed to go to the toilet or to sit out, so that's what we focus on. Personally, I take every person's wishes and goals and help them achieve that as best as I can. If it's them doing it on themselves or with support of one or two staff, or if it's using a hoist to let them access a sitting chair so we can get them outside, whatever that person's wants we try to achieve. Sometimes it can be just simply going in to help support other staff with their moving and handling. If it's about using different pieces of equipment to help achieve a different position, but as more hands make lighter work, so if it's just rolling the person more gently, we don't just see cancer in the hospice, there's many other awful diseases out there as long as cancer, so again it's just trying to give that person as much dignity and comfort in their last days, like you were saying. So yeah, it's hard to pull out of one example, because we physios, as long with OTs, nurses, healthcare, do wonderful work in the hospice, so it's about individual care to that patient.
Yeah. No, thank you so much. And this is something I always say that the soul of Rotherham Hospice, and I think I'm going to extend it to all hospices, is personalised care. Right? That's it. It's as simple as that. So I'm going to go to Amy now. Amy, you've been a nurse for a few years now, working specifically within cancer. What do you think about how can we, let me get my words out, comfort and dignity towards someone who's dying? How does that sort of play out practically, I suppose, as a nurse? What is it that you do?
Yeah, to support them.
Yes.
Yeah, and I guess in going to John's point as well, he made a really good point there around it's not just cancer you're supporting the hospice with it, and obviously I've specialised in cancer, but my work very much now is around supporting everybody, around palliative end of life care, with the awareness that, there's lots of life limiting conditions, and maybe we don't talk about that enough either. So there's a lot of groups of people that maybe don't get as much support as maybe somebody who's had a diagnosis of cancer. And we're doing work to try and bridge that gap, but in a kind of practical sense around supporting someone and giving them dignity, it is around that personalised care that you've just touched upon, about what their wishes are and where they want to be as well. And we talk a lot about preferred place of care, preferred place of death, and what does that mean? But that essentially means, where does that person want to be for their last days, weeks of life? Who do they want to be with? And I see my role, when I've been working clinically as a nurse, is very much trying to achieve that as much as we possibly can. Like John just said, around making sure, they do get their wishes. It's not always possible. That's the really, really hard bit. In a nursing role, that you can't sometimes always achieve that. That people may want to be at home, but actually they're too poorly to transfer from hospital, or it's too complex, or their loved ones aren't in a position to support them at home, for example. So it's about having very practical and open conversations about what that person's wishes are, also the family that are supporting them and their loved ones around, and how can we kind of keep them as comfortable as possible and have that dignity at end of life, even if that's in a hospital environment, a hospice, or at home, whatever that may be. But it very much is a team approach. So as you can't do it on your own.
No, you can't.
You need your physios, you need your doctor, you need everyone around, your chaplains, everyone to come together and say, what can we do for this person as a team, and for the family as well, to kind of meet their needs.
That is very important, the family as well, because it's a holistic approach that we have at hospices, isn't it?
Yeah.
The whole team, and we look at the whole family. But one of the things that's really interesting about what you said is that we may not be able to take the person to their home because of various issues. But I know that many hospices across the country do everything that they can to bring the home to the patient in the hospice.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's absolutely amazing, the lengths that they'll go to, to do. And as you've all said, it's about how do we make that person's end of life journey as comfortable and satisfying for them as possible. So, Maysoon, we talked earlier about end of life, religious aspect. So now, as a hospital chaplain, it's not just Muslims that you deal with, is it? Can you share some stories, perhaps, of other faiths, which is really important? Christianity, Judaism, any others?
Yeah, so being the chaplaincy team lead, I am responsible and for all the patients and all the staff that come through the doors at Rotherham Hospital, regardless of faith. So what I need to make clear is we have a team. So I don't work in isolation on my own. I have a team of those faith leaders who are from the Catholic faith. We have a priest, we have staff from the Christian faith, we have a cascade list which I've introduced at the Rotherham Hospital. So if somebody comes in from a certain faith, say from Sikh or Hinduism or Judaism, and we don't have that chaplain in the team, we have a cascade list of members in the community that we can kind of call upon for the services. So what we have to ensure, what I have to ensure, is that whoever has asked for a service at the end of life, that is accommodated to the best of our ability. Being a woman of faith, I always try to make sure that whenever I am accommodating, I do try and accommodate regardless of people's faith. I know of a situation where a woman came into the chapel, because our offices are based in the chapel, which kind of sounds strange to some people when we actually tell them that's where we're actually based. So I remember this woman came into the chapel, and all I heard her was from my office, just sat in the chapel and crying. So my immediate response was to go out and see who is the one in distress. I went out to see her, spoke to her, sat with her for at least 15-20 minutes, and from her conversations I identified quite quickly that she was of the Christian faith. In my heart, in my head, I knew I've got somebody behind those doors that is of a Christian chaplain who may prefer offering a prayer, and she may benefit with that. So she's obviously crying, and with the diagnosis she was just informed that she's obviously got cancer. I spoke to her and I said, I've got somebody that can offer a prayer with you if you like. And she said, no, my love, it's absolutely fine. I just needed somebody to listen to me, and you've given that to me. That's sufficient. And honestly, that just lit up my face, that lit up my day, because for me, I'm pastorally trained, and so are all the other members of my team. So we provide a patient-led service, but what I said 30 seconds ago is I'm a woman of faith. I would not have been able to sleep at night knowing that I've got somebody of the Christian faith in front of me, and I've not even offered that to her.
Yes.
Whether she declined it and she didn't want that support like she did, then that's absolutely fine, but I needed to sleep with my own conscience, and this is why I always am conscious when I'm doing this role, to make sure that we've got Mass for the Catholics, we've got Sunday service for those people that can benefit from that. So although they are end of life and they are in what we refer to the purple butterfly rooms in the hospital, they have got that support within the hospital if they do want that. They don't necessarily have to be an inpatient or an outpatient. They could literally just call upon our services, and we would be there to offer them that.
Thank you so much for that. Amy, you were nodding quite a lot in what Maysoon was saying, and one of the things I want to pick up from that is that the Australian patient that you spoke about earlier, and I'm just interested in understanding, did faith play any part within that, and do you yourself have a faith or no faith, and how does that sort of, I'm just trying to understand, and I think my listeners want to understand that if you have a faith or no faith, and when they go into a hospice setting or a hospital setting at end of life care, how does that sort of interrelate in terms of the patient the people that are caring for them, whether that makes a difference to them, and if you could share some of that with me, please.
Yeah. So the Australian, the lady whose son lived in Australia, she was a Catholic, actually, and a very devout Catholic. So they were, the vicar used to come and see her, the priest used to come and see her every day, actually, throughout that time, and she wanted last rites, reading, and things like that. So I was nodding when you were talking about that, because you kind of say you offered that kind of Christian, but actually it goes back to we've all got different faiths. So I'm Church of England, I'm Christian Church of England, we've all got different faiths, but actually in that moment you gave that compassion and that listening ear, and it actually really doesn't matter who that is, you were her person at that time. And I think sometimes people get a little bit scared of, but I'm not from the same religion, I'm not from the same faith, I can't offer them enough. And I think we absolutely can, and I think sometimes it is about breaking down them barriers as well, that there are certain things that we can't do, from different faiths, and they will obviously want their specific faith leader or someone from their religion or culture. But I think actually breaking that down and just being with that person, giving that compassion, was absolutely what she needed. And you were that person that was meant to be sat there, that heard her and sat there that day. And I think as a nurse, for me, I've cared for so many different people, from no religion, Jehovah's Witnesses, where I've had multiple occasions where they've come in very unwell and they don't want blood transfusions, for example.
Yes.
And people have died because they didn't want blood transfusions. That was their wish, that was their religion, and that's their wish. And I feel for me, it's just that there's no judgment here. I'm here as a nurse or a friend or a colleague, or as a daughter, whoever. I've supported, my father-in-law I'm a mother-in-law as well, and my husband through that. So we've all, I think it's just, again, just breaking down them barriers and just not being scared of that, and not being scared of other cultures and religions, and just accepting everybody for who they are. And
because
that's
at the
kind
end
of
of the
what
day, and that resonates, and because at the end of the day I'm thinking that as professionals, we are here to do a job,
yeah,
and that's to support those people to the best of our
absolutely.
abilities and everything that we can do. I've got a difficult question for you now, John.
Yeah,
I'm
fine,
sorry
right.
about this. I do say that I don't ask difficult questions on here, but this is something that's just come up now, and I'm thinking, now, we're talking about end-of-life care, we're talking about physiotherapy, which is pretty much hands-on at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just thinking of the intersection between males and females, and religions and traditions, and sometimes it's not religion. Sometimes it's just a personal preference.
Mm-hmm.
So, how would you, within physiotherapy, manage those sort of preferences of providing support for the opposite gender, and what sort of things have you got in place for that?
So, being honest, nobody's ever kind of said no to me purely because I'm a male in the last 3 years. Now we're having this conversation, it's going to happen twice next week, I promise you that. I want to say I make a joke out of it, but I don't, because that'll come across wrong. But it's, I always kind of voice that concern, because I've got that professionally as well. It's, are you comfortable me being in here? Are you comfortable me being a male, kind of supporting you to do this? If it is females, I will always go in with a female member of staff as well. It's always giving that person that advocate, because sometimes people are quite afraid to say anything. So I don't make a joke of it, sorry, that were an incorrect term, but it's, I tend to broach it. I always ask that a person is comfortable. Like I said, so far it's never come up, but again, it's, I think I've always been taught to respect that. Yeah, we're offering, I know in healthcare sometimes you can't always pick who you get, but I think again, working in a hospice it's a sensitive time, so it's something that we should be able to offer our work around. If they did ask for a female physio, I haven't got the answer for that, I'm afraid, but that would be something that we'd have to have a think about.
No, that's true, and I know it's a difficult question, but it's a challenging issue across all services, where services will, where they can, provide that provide that preference, but sometimes it's just not possible, for whatever reason. But the reason I wanted to raise that with you specifically was that we're talking about end-of-life care. We're talking potentially about the last moments of someone's life, and you are the only person who might be there at that moment in time, because we never know when death is going to come, do we? I know that end of life is 12 months onwards, but then you speak to, and we've all know people, don't we, or have heard of people who've been given 3 days and 20 years later they're still here. And then other people who've been told, well, you've got 6 months, and 2 days later they're no longer here. So there's that. And I was just thinking that, to my mind, I was thinking, okay, end of life, I'm in pain. Am I really bothered whether it's a man or a woman who's going to help me get to the toilet? So that was my thought. Have Amy and Maysoon, have you got any sort of thoughts on those, what we've just talked about? Any sort of answers?
I think it's just, again, just being open with people about that, about how you feel, how they feel about you giving them that care, and kind of asking their consent, really. And I think what we maybe do need to be better at across all health and social care is being a bit more trauma informed. And what I mean by that is appreciating that people may have had really difficult situations in the past that might then impact how they feel in a healthcare environment. So, for example, people that maybe been through the prison service, or our prisoners, actually I've cared for a lot of prisoners actually that have come into hospital to be cared for, and how that might feel. So imagine receiving palliative end of life care in a hospital ward, you know, when you've got a prison officer attached to you or stood next to you, and it's how do we maintain that dignity. But I think just becoming a bit more open about that and being a bit more informed and asking people their wishes. It just goes back to that communication again and again and again. What are your wishes? Would you prefer, you know, a male, the female, somebody of the same, you know, religion and faith, if we can accommodate that, and how they feel about that really. And I guess what we haven't touched upon in this is sudden death as well, because obviously we've talked a lot about getting a terminal diagnosis and maybe having that little bit of time, and what again is really common is that things can just happen very suddenly, and it's not the person that's died that we're supporting in that situation, it's the loved ones around. And I've been in situations where I've had to phone next of kins and their loved ones has passed away suddenly. You know, yeah, they may have cancer and they've come in for hospital admission, but they weren't palliative and they weren't end of life, or you know, death by suicide, you know, sudden accident, sudden trauma. All of that is really complex and multifaceted as well. And it's about, we haven't touched upon that yet, that just came to my head as we were talking, that sometimes we can't always plan for these things, and again it is about supporting the loved one's wishes but through the family.
Yes.
So things like organ donation. So for example, my mother-in-law had an epileptic fit, fell and banged her head and died. So essentially we ended up getting a call in the middle of the night and having to go, and she was in intensive care, neurointensive care, and we had lots of conversations with the organ donation team. She wasn't on the organ donation register, but around would you like to donate her organs, because she's in the 1% that could, because it was a sudden death. And my husband chose with his brothers to go down that route, and it was actually really wonderful because she saved 4 people's lives. But in that situation it was about the palliative care team and the organ donation team were coming at it of, well, your mum has died, what would her wishes be? And then it's then about the family then thinking about her wishes when they're no longer here. So that's just something that came to my mind as well, that it's, again, there's lots of situations, you know, death and dying kind of intertwines everything and every part of life and everybody, you know, we're all going to be impacted, and it's sometimes really complex. So I hope I've answered your question there. I know I've gone off on a few different tangents.
No. I mean, you know, that was really good, because I'd not put down organ donation, so that is something that we will sort of carry on and touch upon later. But sudden death, you know, we will talk about that in the third section of our programme, because we are coming to a commercial break very soon. So, Sister Maysoon, what I would like you to do now for me is that in Urdu, Mirpuri, Punjabi, whichever language you prefer, if you could just sum us up what we've been talking about. You've only got about a minute and a half.
Pressure.
No pressure at all.
No pressure.
No pressure at all.
So हम बस यही बातें कर रहे थे, हम तीनों जो यहाँ स्पेशल गेस्ट हम तीनों आए हुए हैं ब्रदर मेहरबान के शो के ऊपर, कि अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह हम सारों ने तो मरना है ही एक ना एक दिन, लेकिन अगर हम इस मौजू के ऊपर बात करें अपने घर वालों के साथ, अपने अजीज रिश्तेदारों के साथ, तो जब हमारे ऊपर ये फिर टाइम आएगा, फिर हमारे लिए कोई मुश्किल पेश नहीं होती. हम ज़्यादातर डरते हैं इस मौजू पर डिस्कस करने के ऊपर, लेकिन जब अल्लाह सुब्हानो ताला ने फरमाया ही यही बात है कि मौत तो बरहक है, हम सब के ऊपर ये आनी है, तो बेहतर यही है कि हम अपनी तैयारी पकड़े, ना कि हम उस बात से डरे या भागे या डिनायल में रहे. हम कोशिश करें कि हम अपनी तैयारी पकड़ी रखें.
Thank you so much. जैसे हमारी बहन मैसून कह रही थी, देखो ना मौत तो बरहक है, तो मुझे काफ़ी जो है ना, मैं इसके बारे में सोचा कि मुसलमानों के लिए तो हमको सबको इल्म है कि मरना तो है, तो जब पैदा होते हैं तो उस दिन के बाद जो है ना हम मौत की तैयारी करते हैं, लेकिन जब बात करने की बात आती है ना तो हम नहीं करते. So we need to sort of, talk a little bit more about this. So we've got an extended program today, and we're going to go into a short commercial break, and then we'll come back to you at 2 minutes past 12. Allah Hafiz. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to the third section of today's Care Across Cultures. Today's topic is about faith, feelings and final moments. If you've just joined us, you're listening to Care Across Cultures on Link FM 96.7. Our studio hotline is 0114 261 8181, or you can call us on WhatsApp 07939 849 339. I've been talking to some amazing professionals and colleagues, Maysoon, Shafiq, John Mitchell, Amy Kenyon, and we've had a long discussion about lots and lots of different topics around death and dying. So for this part of the programme, we're going to talk specifically around, we've talked about death and dying as end-of-life care, where we know that we've been given a diagnosis that it's end of life. Now that might be 12 months, it might be 3 months, it might be 2 days, where death is expected. And Amy mentioned sudden death, which I'm thankful for. So I want to talk about sudden death. How do we cope? And I'm going to go, because Amy mentioned it, we're going to go straight to Amy. So elaborate a little bit more about sudden death, Amy.
Yeah.
What are you talking about? What does that actually mean?
So I think I guess it means when death happens when people don't expect it to happen. So for example, if we're talking about palliative and end of life care and kind of planning for that and having them conversations, being given a terminal cancer diagnosis, etc. But sometimes things happen that are just completely out of our control, and that's the thing about death and dying, isn't it? We never quite know when it's going to be when it's going to knock on our door or when it's going to be our turn, if that makes sense. So I think it's just important to mention that, which is why I mentioned it. And that could be different situations. It could be a tragic accident, a road traffic collision. It could be suicide, or it could be that somebody does have a cancer diagnosis and they've been admitted to hospital for something. They might have a chest infection or something that we would never expect, and then something, they have a heart attack or something on the ward, for example, and that's sudden. So even though the family may be aware that yes, they've got cancer, but they're having active treatment, that death wasn't expected to happen so quickly, if that makes sense. And I think it's important just to think about that, because it's the impact on families and loved ones and staff as well, in kind of how we kind of manage that and how we support family and loved ones, and to explore that person's wishes when they're no longer here to express them. But it also goes back to, if we have conversations about dying earlier, so if I sit here and say, well, I don't want to be buried, I want to be cremated, I don't want a funeral, as per se, I want a big party, I don't want anyone to wear black, and that's my wishes. My husband knows that now. He knows exactly what I want, but that's, I guess, because I'm quite open about it. So if anything should ever happen to me, he would know. So I guess it goes back to that, let's talk about it now and normalise it and have them open conversations and just make it a normal thing that we just talk about. And I know it's really difficult, and I'm coming from the fact that I feel comfortable talking about it, not everyone does, but wouldn't it be amazing if we did that in a really open environment, so that then if things do happen, families know what to do? Because that's really hard for families then. Say, I have no idea what they would have wanted.
Let's do a national campaign, all of us here, about, let's start talking about, having these conversations. That'd be really great. One of the things that you said earlier about sudden death, And last week I was talking about advanced care planning. And what happens then? So we've had a sudden death in a hospice or a hospital setting, wherever, and we have maybe family members who have conflicting views about, you know, what happens next. How do we, as professionals within a service, how do we overcome some of those issues? Where, you know, what's the protocols, what's the procedures, and where do we go from there?
It's very challenging because if it's not written down, so if people don't have wills, lasting powers of attorney, advanced care plans, it's very difficult to then, you are relying on families and loved ones to make them decisions, and there can be conflicting views, you know, and I've been in lots of situations in nursing where family members don't get on. They're fighting and arguing in the corridor of the hospital because one of them wants one thing and one of them wants another, and it is very much then on us as healthcare professionals to try and navigate that, provide them with the support because they're recently bereaved and struggling. You know, sudden death, it's really, really, really difficult, you know, for relatives and family members in that situation. And then it is about then sitting down and trying to be that mediator really, and about what that person might want. But if it's not, if people don't know and it's not written down, it is very, very difficult. I don't know if anyone else got views on that.
Maysoon?
Yeah, I think exactly agree with what Amy said. We have categorically put the terminology of sudden death, palliative care, all of these terms, we've put them into categories. But if we really step back and think about it, even if somebody does have a terminal illness and they do have a diagnosis, even that death is sudden. I had a patient who I saw on Friday who was told 2.5 years ago that he would only have 6 to 10 months to live, and 2.5 years later he's still here. I had a patient who was brought into our emergency department to the WYICB at the hospital, and she were only brought in because she were out of breathlessness. So she was brought in whilst she was in hospital. She had a cardiac arrest. I went to see her, provided the family with comfort. The doctors obviously said she hasn't got long, but we just don't know how long she has got. I was then called by switchboard when I was on call to inform me that she's now passed away and I needed to return to the hospital so I could complete the last rites, because it was a Muslim female patient. So for me, I always see every death as sudden, regardless. But I clearly understand, having said that statement, I clearly do understand the difference between a sudden death, because that's more of a shock, whereas the family are kind of alluded to or made aware if somebody has a terminal illness, if someone's got an advanced care plan made. So I understand the differences, but I think in my personal experience, and I've been doing this job for as long as I can remember, I think it's sudden death every time, because there is almost some shock that comes to the staff member who's offered that care and attention to that patient, and it's the same with the family member who has had to lose that someone. It's almost like denial in every situation, in all honesty.
And I'm just thinking sudden death, but I've just had a thought. Unexpected death? Yeah. And whether that's the same as sudden death, I don't know. What do people think? What does everybody think here? John, what do you think?
So this is definitely a personal opinion. I'm from a hospice, so sadly it usually does happen in a hospice. But yeah, it's sudden death nobody's prepared for, and my respect goes out to Amy and Maysoon, because that's something we don't see. Everybody's kind of got an inkling that that's coming where I work from. But yeah, how you deal with supporting those relatives that, you know, the husbands and wife have gone out to work that morning and then they get that dreaded phone call that sadly they're not coming back. It's how you support anybody in that environment or speak to those families. That must be, to me, that's on a different level, and that's so. I haven't got much of an opinion. I've never had that experience, and I'd I couldn't even begin to put myself in that situation, truth be told. It must be hard. I suppose the only thing I could relate back to is having these conversations earlier. It's like Amy said, it's her husband knows what she would like. I've told my wife what I would like. She's completely changed that, and I'll get something what she wants, which is absolutely fine. Absolutely fine. But it's breaking down. It comes back to breaking down those barriers about talking about death. It is a morbid subject. Nobody likes to talk about it. But as Maysoon says, just write it down. As long as that person writes it down, then there's no fighting for family. There's no. It's a very sad time, but that is one worry, and that's one pressure taken off you. If you've written down what you'd like or what you prefer.
Or maybe another one might be that if you've got, I know we have next of kin that we capture, don't we? But the next of kin is not necessarily the person that you want to make the decisions. And perhaps it's about letting the hospital or the hospice where we are, this is the person in case of anything, and letting all your family know, I think, as well, and your friends and your colleagues and your places of worship, that if anything happens to me, this is the person who's going to make all the decisions. That, I suppose, that's another way. But the message I'm getting from all of you is about a wider awareness around, let's talk about death, whether it's end of life care, whether it's sudden death or whether it's unexpected death, because as we all know, we're all going to die, aren't we, one day? And then how do we make it, we've been talking a lot about how do we make it the last days as comfortable for the patient, for the person that's whose life is expected to end, but what about the family that's left behind as well? We need to do something about that as well. One of the things that this sort of leads me into now is that organ donation, which is a really big and serious topic. I'm just going to open this out to everybody before I ask for Maysoon's specific opinions, religious rulings on Muslims and organ donation, because I know there seems to be a misperception out there. So let me start with, I'm going to start with John. Organ donation in terms of, let's make it personal, John. Have you thought about this? Something that you've thought about or not?
Yeah, it's quite sad, but every time you do like your driving licence, I think it prompts you on your on the government webpage. Would you be an organ donator? And I was put yeah. I've got no religion. You could class me as an atheist. So politely, whatever happens to me when I'm gone, I'm not going to need whatever they want to take out of me. So if I can help, save a life, increase a life, then yeah, so be it. That's a legacy that hopefully I could leave one day.
Fantastic, thank you. And Amy?
Yeah, I'm on the organ donation register and have been for a long, long time. And I guess being on the other end as well as a family member who, mother-in-law, obviously we decided to donate her organ. She wasn't on the list, but we felt that's what she would have wanted. It really helped, I think, in that kind of grieving process, because she saved 4 people's lives. So there was kind of something else that came from it. So I feel quite strongly actually about advocating for organ donation, and it goes back to that raising awareness, similar to what we talked about today, raising awareness and having that conversation about it, openly across all different cultures.
Thank you. So Maysoon, I wanted to ask you specifically around any religious rulings for Muslims, but that's not enough. I'm also wanting you to expand that across other religions. As a chaplain, where does that sort of fit in, please?
I think the starting point here would be there are a lot of misconceptions in all faiths about organ donation. If we specifically answer the first question about the Muslim faith, I was at a mosque last week during Diamaters Week and was raising this awareness about having open honest conversations about death and dying. And organ donation was one of the things that was poached, and it was one of the things that was brought up by the audience. So then I used it to enlighten the audience by asking them, what does Allah, the God, the Lord, say in the Quran? And Allah says, to save one life, it's as though you've saved the whole of humanity. Now, if we dissect that ruling from the Quran, the Holy Book, we understand that to mean it is including organ donation. And then people were asking the questions, well, what happens, because the belief, the ultimate belief in Islam is when a dead person is even washed, so even when the ghusl is taking place, they will hear and feel every pain that as they're touched. And then I turned that around on her again, and I'm saying this to the audience that's listening. What happens to those, because that's our ultimate belief, that those souls who are good souls, that when the soul is taken out of the body, they won't feel the pain. Whereas if it's a bad soul and they've obviously done bad actions, they're obviously going to feel the pain when the soul is taken out of the body. So if your response is different for each answer depending on the soul, why do you then think everybody will feel the pain when your organs are going to be taken out? And they didn't have an answer for that. And then my other question to them was, what if you was the recipient? What if you needed the organ? Would you then not get an organ because there are no Muslim donors or those that are going to match? So I recently, as I said, as the head of Islamic advice for the National NHS Muslim Network, I was asked by a doctor, a Muslim doctor, she needed her daughter to go under the knife, and for whatever reason she needed some skin to be put on the skin for this young child that she had, for her daughter. And her question was, could I take this as tissue, as organ donation from somebody else? And my immediate response was, yes, absolutely. And then her response was, but her skin doesn't match my daughter's. And that is something that we are facing. There is an absolute stigma and taboo attached to organ donation, yet it's just the lack of awareness. It's because nobody speaks about it. There is literature. Mufti Zubair Butt, he is a prominent scholar who has raised several fatwas on this topic and tried his very level best to educate the community, but we still need it more at grassroots level. We need more scholars, more chaplains, more people kind of raising this awareness. I can only speak on behalf of my hospital, and as a representative from the trust, I'm telling you, when it comes to organ donation this year in September, we're actually raising the profile of Muslim organ donation, because this is something that we don't even speak about. It's just a silent taboo, and it's a stigma, and I don't even know where the stigma's attached and where it's come from.
I think that's another programme at
Yeah.
some point, organ donation, and hopefully most of you will come back and talk about that. But talk to me also about other religions.
Yes, so other faiths, from my experience, tells me that they do, some have the same stigma attached to it, because the belief is, again, as the Muslims believe, that once somebody does die, they'll feel every pain. So that's why sometimes some faiths prefer not to even touch and approach that subject. But like Amy was saying, we've got an amazing palliative care team in the hospital, an amazing organ donation team who really approach the family members, the next of kin, and try and ascertain what their loved one would have wanted to do. And usually they'll either decline it or they'll kind of proceed and go ahead. So it's having these conversations regardless of faith or belief, because ultimately I think I speak on behalf of us all when I say that we are offering a patient-led service. So we're actually asking the wishes and desires of either the patient or the loved one once they've passed to be able to offer that service and to be able to do that justice, because ultimately we have to sleep with our own conscience, and if we know we've done a good day's job, then ultimately that's all that matters.
Thank you so much for that. We are coming towards the end of the programme now, so we've got about a few more minutes left. I just wanted to go back to Amy and talk specifically about, you and I had a discussion over the phone last week about your job role in terms of addressing health inequalities.
Yeah.
So if we are looking specifically around end-of-life care, Could you mention a couple of sort of, or the main health inequalities that you've come across as challenges and what's been done about them?
Yeah. So we've just done a big piece of work across West Yorkshire actually, which is published, which is called, it was a West Yorkshire Health Needs Assessment, and it was specifically around palliative end of life care. And what it's done is kind of really look at what's provided across West Yorkshire in palliative end of life care, but with a specific focus on health inequalities, and lots of data, stark data actually has come out of that, that's kind of really guiding our work moving forward across West Yorkshire. So for example, we know that people from ethnic minority groups have higher admissions to accident and emergency and higher use of ambulances at the end of life. So we're doing some community engagement work in Bradford with somebody called Dr. Jamila Hussain, who's absolutely amazing, who's already got lots of links there, kind of grassroots links to kind of open up some of these conversations with black and ethnic minority groups around, well, why do you go to accident and emergency in the last 3 months of life? Because we don't want to make any assumptions about that, and try and break down some of them barriers about getting them the right support. It also came out around learning disabilities as well. So learning disabilities have higher admissions to hospital as well, and die around 20 years younger than anybody else. And then there's lots of research that's come out around actually we need to kind of tailor resources and things for people with learning disabilities so they can talk about their wishes and understand death in their own way. So we're doing lots of work again around learning disabilities. We also work closely with a project in Leeds in collaboration with St Gemma's Hospice looking at homeless population. So they offer an exceptional service in Leeds supporting people who are homeless with palliative end of life care needs. And again, we know that that group again die much younger, more complex. A lot of people end up dying on the streets. We would love to replicate that across West Yorkshire. So we're doing, and lots more. You know, we're working with the prison service. We've got health inclusion teams specifically across West Yorkshire that we work closely with. Again, Gypsy Roma Traveller, you know, we could talk about this for a whole, but it's just to say that we are committed, I guess, across West Yorkshire, and the West Yorkshire Integrated Care Board, I can speak for the whole organisation, is committed to, in whatever, whether it's palliative end of life care, but across all healthcare and social care, kind of bridging this gap really, and ensuring that everybody has equitable care.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So we are really close to the end, so I'm going to give you maybe a few seconds each. One final message of hope, and I'll start with you, Maysoon, for our listeners.
My final,
Briefly.
yeah, my final message would be literally have open, honest conversations with your loved ones on what your wishes are. We've all kind of spoken to our loved ones. I've spoken to my husband. He knows what my wishes are. So have these conversations.
And I'm going to stop you there. I'm really sorry, but I'm going to stop you there because Amy, last.
Yeah, absolutely same. Have the open conversations, and but what I would say is that there is always somebody out there that can help as well. So please don't sit with it alone. You know, kind of go to your GP or whoever's supporting you, your physio, anyone, and have that conversation. It's always help.
And John, last word from you, John.
Write down your final wishes and donate your organs.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you for our listeners. That's the end of the programme. Allah Hafiz, and we will catch you next week.